Awesome. Hi everyone. The NAPB Early Career Working Group is delighted to host the first of a series of 3 webinars that we have planned for 2021. My name is Sarah Turner Hissong, and I'll be co-hosting today's webinar with Chandler Levinson. I'd also like to acknowledge 2 other members of the Early Career Group, Sam McConaughey and Deb Menikos, who aren't able to join us today, but extensively helped in the organization and planning of this event. And for today's discussion, we really wanted to highlight unique routes to careers in plant breeding and industry. So we've invited some awesome panelists, Amy Kelly, Scott Jackson, and John Hickey, who all lead teams at Bayer and have agreed to share their insights on transitioning from the public to the private sector and their views on the future of plant breeding. So we'll aim to leave about 15 minutes towards the end of the webinar for audience questions. So please be sure to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and also to vote for the questions that you'd really like to see asked. With that, Amy, Scott, and John, thank you so much for joining us today. And to kick things off, we were hoping you could tell us a little bit more about yourselves and your career journey. And let's stick with the order of the flyer and start with Amy, followed by Scott, and finally John.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me? Cool. So my name is Amy Kelly. I work for Bayer Crop Sciences. I am the simulation and modeling lead. Been working at Bayer for 3 years. My team has a role in breeding. We develop the tools and technologies to help us simulate in silico breeding pipelines and kind of scope out what are the opportunities to impact with new methodologies that are going to allow us to add genetic gain to the pipeline. I also work really closely with different groups in the genomic space. And so really the interest there is to identify new genomics technologies, new data assets that we can leverage at scale in our breeding pipeline to be more precise about the genomic targets that we want to breed with and how to get those targets into the pipeline in a way that's cost efficient. So from my perspective, I'm not a plant breeder by any means. In fact, I'm quite the opposite. I actually got my start getting a PhD in population genomics, studying zoonotic diseases. I worked a lot with deer, white-tailed deer. If you're from the Midwest, you see these all over your yards, and they can carry a lot of different diseases. And so I worked with a team of spatial epidemiologists with state and local governments, trying to figure out how we could use genetics to predict the spread of diseases across the landscape and come up with management strategies to try to keep them at bay. So I got my taste for government work in graduate school, working with those kind of the Department of Wildlife, Fish and Wildlife Department in Illinois and across the Midwest, and really enjoyed kind of the setting of government and kind of the resources that I had to offer. So after I got my PhD, I went out and worked at the National Institutes of Health in the Washington, D.C. area, and took a completely different turn in my career, went from wildlife into a lab that studied yeast, in a protein biochemistry lab to be specific. And so we were actually using yeast as models to study human disease. And so kind of using our friendly eukaryotic friends to look at how different proteins could misfold. So I worked with protein misfolding diseases, and then we kind of used yeast to understand how those proteins from their biochemistry perspective could cause disease in humans. And so it was a completely different change of pace. I was in a molecular lab working with protein biochemists. I didn't like it. I wasn't very good at it. And so I kind of went back to my roots in the computational biology and bioinformatics, started connecting with the folks that are kind of the underpinnings of NCBI. They were doing really, really cool things with fungal genomics, and I got hooked up with them and kind of started publishing papers in the fungal evolution ecology space. Really enjoyed it, kind of missed the practical application. And so after 4 years in DC, I came back to the Midwest and took a job for the United States Department of Ag, working as a research geneticist. And so we got to study a broad number of crop pathogens. Mostly I worked with Fusarium, which are little creatures that can infect soy and corn and all sorts of different vegetables. And so we were using genomics to try to understand the evolution of that genus and how different pathogens adapted to different hosts, and then really kind of mining whole genome data to understand effector molecules and identify potentially crop protection products by kind of going through the fungal genome, understanding how the fungi were developing toxins to attack the plant, and then kind of using that information to guide lab studies and greenhouse studies. So I loved that space. It was a fun area to work in. After 4 years, I made an abrupt switch and decided to go into industry. This was due to really a change in political environment, that we lost some support in the USDA for research back when the Trump era began. And so I started looking for jobs. I was familiar with Monsanto at the time, loved the idea of industry, kind of loved the innovation. And so I applied for a job and took that back. It's been about 3 years. So I started as an individual contributor working in genomics, and then I was able to take my lead role a couple of years ago. And so I actually report to Scott now. And so he has to deal with me on a daily basis, but just appreciate, hey, thanks for the opportunity, and good to talk with you all, and looking forward to the discussion.
You want me to jump in, Chandler?
Yeah,
All right.
go for it.
Okay. So just to follow up on Amy's last comment, I'm not sure who reports to whom. Let's see if I can get a laugh out of her. So great. Thank you, Sarah and Sam. I don't know if Sam's on, and Chandler for the invitation. It's great to be here. And I was looking through the attendee name, and I see quite several names that I know. So it's good to, I guess, virtually see you all again. I've seen you at various NAPB meetings and various other meetings, and I sit on Chandler's PhD committee. So I get to cause her pain over the next year or so. So a little bit about my career. I'm going to go chronologically. So I did my PhD, a master's at UW-Madison, the best university in the US. It's too bad everyone's silent. You can't hear people laugh or moan or make comments.
I can come off mute if you want, Scott.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. And did a short postdoc at University of Minnesota. And both my postdoc and my PhD were very much, I went through the plant breeding, plant genetics program at UW-Madison, but my research was in the area of chromosome biology and cytogenetics. So a very sort of qualitative science. You're going to hear from John next, who's very quantitative, and the other extreme. So you get one fish image with your signal on a chromosome, and that's a paper. You don't have to replicate. Well, you do replicate, but. So I went from there, and I started my faculty career at Purdue University. And I was at Purdue from 2001 to 2011, so 10 years. Went through all the ranks, assistant, associate, bullet at Purdue. Developing, and when I went from University of Minnesota to Purdue, I'd been doing some work in genomics sequencing. We're still doing Sanger sequencing at that time. When I went to Purdue, I really jumped into genomics, and I helped lead the soybean sequencing project, and then subsequently several other crop genomes. And really got involved. We did a lot of work on polyploidy, chromosome evolution, duplications within genomes, effects of duplicated genes on gene expression, and we started getting into epigenetics and various other things. But really all focused on crop genomes, but at a functional level, understanding how genomes are organized and how they work. So I left Purdue, and I should add in there that I also spent 2 years at the National Science Foundation as a program officer at 2 different times, which is a really interesting experience. If you have a chance, Amy talked about spending time at the NIH in Bethesda outside of DC. If you get a chance to do something like that, it's a really good experience to understand how things work at the federal level. As a program officer, you actually help write the calls for proposals. So you get to put your fingerprint on what they want to fund in the next 3 to 5 years. You make decisions on what you fund. You get to interact. It's a whole level. It's a different view of science and how it works. And it's a really cool experience if you do have that opportunity. So I left Purdue in 2011 and moved to University of Georgia. And I'm actually still in my University of Georgia office. And I was at Georgia for about 8 or 9 years, and then I joined Bayer in 2019, a year and a half ago. Can't keep track of years anymore. So 18, 19 years in academia, and then I joined Bayer in 2019, where I lead a group does a lot of what Amy talked about. So the group is called Genetic Pipeline Design, and we're involved in designing the genetic pipelines for all of our row crops. So that's corn, soybean, canola, and rice. Forgetting something, wheat. I feel like I'm forgetting a crop in there somewhere, but anyway, everything from doing simulation modeling, which is part of Amy's group, on how changes in pipelines will affect long-term genetic gain or diversity across pipelines, to how we integrate genomics into breeding decisions, how we better utilize the molecular marker technology and tools and across the breeding pipelines, to testing out new breeding methodologies across different pipelines. Just a bunch of different things that the group is involved with. It's in R&D, so still a lot. It's almost all discovery. A very active and vibrant group. A lot of data scientists. But it's a dramatic change after 18 years in academia going to industry. But one that I've truly enjoyed. I've got to meet people like Amy and work with her. Most recently, John and others. There's just some fantastic people inside industry that I was not aware of until I joined. I think I will turn over to John at this point.
Thanks, Scott, and also thank you to Sarah, Chandler, and colleagues for the invitation to come and meet people today. Like Scott, I look at the list of attendees and I recognize a lot of the names there as well. So it's nice to be with you all. So my story a little bit is I grew up in the west of Ireland. So I grew up on a farm. So from that, I was interested in agriculture. But for those of you who might not be familiar, the west of Ireland is very wet. So crops, you can't grow crops in the west of Ireland, basically. The only thing you can do is grow grass. We're very good at growing grass, but that means the agriculture is entirely focused around about animals in the west. In the east of Ireland, we have more crops. So it's kind of strange that a person with that interest in agriculture originally ends up working in crop breeding. So my journey took me for many years through the livestock industry. So I studied agriculture at the university in Dublin. I got interested in genetic improvement of livestock as a field through that, I guess. I then went to Edinburgh and did a master's in quantitative genetics. So there's a historical animal breeding master's in Edinburgh that goes back for 70 years essentially, and but they merged with the evolutionary biology program a few years before I joined. So the master's became a kind of a mix or a blend of practical animal breeding through the lens of evolutionary biology. And for me, that was a really interesting sort of foundation that kind of reappears a lot in my thinking subsequently. After my master's, I went to the Netherlands to Wageningen University to do a PhD in cattle breeding. So at that time, the Irish government was establishing a national cattle breeding program. And they built something from scratch over a 10-year period. And my PhD was in the middle 4 years of that 10-year journey. So it was interesting from my perspective, to work on things and to be trained in the technical area, but also to see that entity being put together and engaging across the industry and putting the technical pieces into the mix. That has been a very useful experience in my career. At the end of my PhD, so I did my PhD in what you might call classic animal breeding. And right at the end of my PhD, genomic selection came like this big wave. And essentially what it did was almost make irrelevant all of the things that I had been working on and focusing on in my PhD. So that was, you're asking yourself, well, what have I done? I've trained myself in something that's now old. But it was actually a huge opportunity, because this huge open space opened up in front of myself and many people at that stage of our careers, called genomic selection. And I went and spent 4 years in Australia doing a postdoc on the deployment of genomic selection in sheep initially, switched to thinking about genotyping technology and genotyping strategies and imputation algorithms in pigs and poultry. Through that work, I got to interact with the major global animal breeding companies, Genus PIC in the case of the pig industry, Aviogen in the case of the poultry industry, and Pfizer in the case of the cattle industry. And that helped me to build a really, a very interesting network, but also to have the research from my postdoc actually be deployed at scale and be faced with the challenges and the opportunities that those challenges bring in thinking about how do you develop tools that get deployed practically. After some point of time in my postdoc, I happened to go and visit CIMMYT in Mexico for a random reason. And I ended up essentially a postdoc opportunity emerged for me out of that visit. So I went to Mexico and spent 1 year there. And initially I was just going to have a sort of a, if you like, a semi-sabbatical. I was going to see what this plant breeding stuff was all about and, just see if I could learn something. But pretty quickly I realized that plant breeding was a fascinating topic and something that I didn't know much about, and that there was a huge opportunity to learn loads of stuff. So I really enjoyed that year. I learned a lot. For family reasons, we moved back then to Europe, and I got a job at the University of Edinburgh as a faculty member, essentially. And I spent the last 8 years at the University of Edinburgh. And I think there my career was, we continue to work on the deployment of genomic selection in livestock and thinking about how whole genome sequence information could be brought to play there, how genome editing technology could be brought to play, how do we integrate quantitative genetics with molecular genetics in an animal breeding sense. But I think more interestingly and more importantly for me personally was I sort of carved out an area where I was leading research at the interface between plant and animal breeding. So trying to translate animal breeding technologies into the context of crops and trying to look at things that crop breeders did that we could deploy in animal breeding and translate in the other direction. And we did lots of research. We had trained lots of students and postdocs in that. And I found that a really interesting period of my career. Through that time, got to know Monsanto, what was then Monsanto. We had a relationship with Monsanto. We were working together on optimization of breeding programs. And through that, an opportunity emerged to join Bayer last October as the head of corn product design, which I think essentially means the early part of the pipeline, the breeding pipeline, and thinking about how do we interact with Scott's team, Amy's team, other people's teams in the organization to integrate the technologies that would be required to accelerate the early part of a pipeline. And fundamentally, I would describe myself as a quantitative geneticist. And for me, a quantitative geneticist, in the definition that I'm using here, is an integrator of technology that brings together lots and lots of different types of technology and points it towards the genetic improvement of a particular population. So looking forward to what that brings over the next few years. So I'll pass it back to Sarah or Chandler. Thank you.
That was great. Y'all have had a lot of transitions. I hope to have that many in my career too. So specifically on, it seems like y'all all started from government or academia. Can y'all talk specifically about your reasons from moving from government or academia into industry? And we can go in the same order, it doesn't matter. Or Scott, you already unmuted.
I was going to ask what order, but if you want to start with Amy, I'm happy to throw her under the bus.
Appreciate that, Scott. So I kind of alluded to this a little bit. My transition from academia and government was unexpected. I actually was really enjoying the kind of opportunities in those types of labs where you could really dig into a specific area of research and become an expert. But as I mentioned, I was very, very close to taking a tenure track position with the USDA, and politics, as you can imagine, impact government research. So Trump took office in January. And then 5 months later, we got the communication from the federal government that the lab was blacklisted for closure. And so that was motivation to get my resume together and start on the job hunt. It actually was, I think, one of the best things that ever happened to me. One, it just kind of reinforced the agility, the capacity to kind of pick up and transition and take your skills and transfer them to a completely different setting. But two, I really think I wouldn't have made that transition to industry without prompting. And now that I've done it, I see all the things that industry has to offer. You really get the breadth of exposure of different crops. And as Scott and John mentioned, the ability to work with really, really amazing people and have an impact on business and agriculture. That's something that's really exciting and motivating to me. So Scott, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so it depends what day of the week you ask me what answer I give. I've been asked this question I don't know how many times, John probably as well. It was a confluence of a number of things that really made the helped me bring to that point of decision making the transition. I had 18, 19 years of a successful academic career. It's awesome. It's a great job being an academic as long as you can get your work funded and get your papers published. It's a great job. Secure salary. You can do just about anything you want as long as you get the money for it. Ability to travel, to collaborate. I have nothing but positive things to say about an academic career. But after 18, 19 years, I had built a lab that was reasonably successful doing genomics and functional genomics in crop plants, mostly legumes. And it was time to do something else. And that's a difficult thing to do in academia, to change your career mid-course. There are a few people who have done it. Sidney Brenner did it twice. He won a Nobel. I'm not Sidney Brenner. That's a really difficult thing to take something you've been successful at and just sort of switch gears and do something else. And I'd been trained in plant breeding, and I really wanted to somehow come back to using genomics and the things that we'd done to affect plant breeding. And it's difficult to get funding to do those types of things in an academic setting. You can get funding for breeding, you can get funding for genomics. Getting funding for both at the same time is rare. And at a scale large enough to actually do what you want to do is even more rare. So it was about this time, and the university had been asking me if I was interested in leadership positions at the university. And I actually went through a training course the year before I left on academic leadership. And I quickly realized as I was going through that course that academic leadership is not what I'm cut out for various reasons. And it was about that point that Mike Graham, who's the head of breeding, contacted me and just asked if I'd be interested in moving to industry. And it was really sort of a very casual conversation. And I sort of off the cuff said, yes, but I can't do anything until my last two daughters graduate high school. And that was the conclusion of the conversation. And I thought that was it. And then several months later, he calls me back up and says, Scott, I think we can work with you. I was like, oh crap, now what do I do? So I went home, talked to my wife, talked to the kids, and it was all those things that have been going on. So I want to apply what I've been doing to breeding. Very difficult to do, very difficult to find funding. And then do it at a scale that you can actually really test things to the scale that you need to. I can keep doing what I've been doing for another till I retire, or I can go into academic leadership, which doesn't really interest me at all at that point. And so that was sort of the thought process going behind that decision. Bayer worked with me, Monsanto. They were in I think I was negotiating with Monsanto, but was hired as Bayer. So it was during that time when Bayer bought Monsanto. And they were able to work with me to stay in Athens. That's why I'm still in my university office, even though I work for Bayer, until my kids graduated high school, which is this May. And so this summer we'll be moving to St. Louis. But it's been I have absolutely no regrets. It's been fantastic. The people that I've met, the ability to do science at scale is incredible. It's just, and the ability to wake up in the mornings and not worry about writing a grant is a really good feeling. I think John and I had that conversation shortly after he joined Bayer, that it's somewhat it's liberating. We're still doing science. We still have the ability to publish if you want to publish. There's obviously things you need to go through for intellectual property and things like that. But we're still a science company, and we're an R&D organization. So it's been a blast, and I don't have any regrets. And I'll turn it over to John.
So Scott and I obviously talk a lot to each other, because what Scott just said is captures a lot my thoughts. So maybe saying the same thing, I might end up using different words. So academia is brilliant. I had great fun in academia. I'm very proud of what I and we, our team, achieved when we were in academia. But it was a cycle. So essentially, it boils down to, one has an idea, you create an excitement about that idea, you sell it to somebody, you build a team to implement that idea, you implement it in some way, and it ends, and you go back to the start. And I felt as though I was about to enter the third wave of that cycle, or the third circle of that cycle. And I asked myself, is this the, sort of the cyclicity of my career that goes on until I retire? And if the answer to that was yes, it didn't seem very attractive. It potentially could get boring. So I think fundamentally I left academia because I was a little bit bored with that piece. Also, as Scott said, in a university, if you think about career progression, sure, you progress in your career and you get more and more fancier sounding titles, but fundamentally the job that you're doing on a day-to-day basis is the same on day one of your faculty career and on year 40 of your faculty career, right? Or else you become an administrator. And I was not personally that passionate about the higher education sector in its broadest sense. It's just not something that I'm personally interested in as much as I'm interested in agriculture. I am deeply passionate about agriculture. I think agriculture is fascinating. So I felt that my career progression in an agricultural organization, is if you like, infinite opportunities to go in all sorts of directions in an organization such as Bayer, whereas in a university, the only way up was out of agriculture. I think also I needed a new challenge, and academia is very nice, and I sort of figured out how you operate in academia and how you succeed in academia. And in academia, you're the king of your own kingdom. Essentially, you're a sort of a sole trader within an organization where you share a common branding. Whereas if you work in a big industrial organization, you are part of a team. There's a common purpose, and it's fun to learn how to collaborate and how to be effective in a very large and complex organization. And that for me was an attractive challenge. Can I go and learn how to succeed in such an organization? Because that's different, requires different ways of thinking than succeeding in academia. So that was something. Obviously, there's the impact piece. So I'm proud of what the impact we had in our academic work. But I think the real impact that one can have through industry is far greater. And if you think, about true interest in science and directly, in academia, sometimes the end product is a paper, and the end product is profile for yourself and your lab, and that's great for a while. But if you're really interested in the science, the publications don't really matter. And I think working in industry, for me, it feels as though if you're deeply interested in the science, you don't have to worry about all the peripheral stuff that goes on in academia. You're just about the science and the objectivity of the science and the quality of the science and the speed and scale at which you can execute the science. So that was something that I like about industry and was attracted by industry. And then that, related to that, when I was making the decision to transition out of academia, I went on Google and I tried to find people that had done such a thing. And it had just after the pandemic had started. So there was a particular individual in the UK that was very high profile. His name is Patrick Vallance. He's the chief scientist of the UK government. So he's essentially behind the COVID strategy. And I started to research about this individual, and it turns out he spent, like Scott, 20 years in an academic position in the UK in a medical school, had been very effective. And then he left and joined, I think it was GlaxoSmithKline or AstraZeneca, one of them, and went and had an industry career. And I found a web a YouTube talk from him describing why he made that decision. And he said, you know, if you're interested in one thing and you want to go really to the depth of that one thing, then academia is where you should make your career. But if you're interested in lots of things and how they all connect together, industry is the place where you can make your career, because industry is about connecting lots and lots of things and having a big impact. And so if you're looking, you know, if you maybe have a look for that Patrick Vallance talk on YouTube, it was certainly something that helped me a lot in my decision. So back to the chairs.
All right. Yeah, that was awesome. Something I think a lot of early career researchers are really concerned about, and a question I get a lot when I'm chatting with people, is which skills are most important to land a permanent position and what skills, you know, industry is looking for. So with that in mind, what are the key skills that you think best prepared you for your current role, and what skills would you recommend developing further for early career researchers? Oh, maybe we can switch up the order. Yeah, maybe Scott was starting.
First,
Yeah.
In front of the bus last time. So what skills? This is funny. We've had this conversation a number of times, both in academia and now in industry. And when I was first at Purdue, we had a department review. We spent an interminable number of hours reviewing the department and how we do graduate education. And we brought in people from industry and talked about what skills they need and how we should train them. And having done that once or twice at Purdue, and I think once at UGA, and now being at an industry, I think the first skill set is to be scientifically literate in your whatever field you're trained in. There's a lot of things that we can train you in within industry. We have all sorts of learning resources to help train on business side of things. But really, what we're hiring you for initially, at least, is for your scientific ability in whatever field that you've been trained in. And that's measured various ways. It's measured through papers. It might be measured through, if you're a data scientist, through coding, through an interview process or something else. But to me, don't give up on that science just to get build up skill sets that you think that you're going to need in industry. That's the preeminent thing. After that comes a bunch of things. So John mentioned some of these: the ability to collaborate, and that was one of the differences, as he pointed out, going from running an academic lab where you're king of your own empire to working in a company where everything is about collaboration. So being able to work in teams, being able to work across teams, being able to communicate with and across teams, all those various pieces of how collaboration works. I would dare say there's almost no one in industry that is an island to themselves. It's just impossible. You have to work within an environment where people work together. You have a common goal, a common purpose, but really being able to function within a team is an important characteristic. But don't forget the science. I'll pass it on.
I can shuffle up the order a bit. So again, I agree with what Scott has to say. So I've been on a bit of a personal evolution of what my answer to that question would be. So when I was up until 2 years ago, if somebody in an early career phase asked me that question, I would say focus entirely on the technical skills. Technical. If you're really good at the technical skills, you will be successful. I've realized in the last 2 years, and this was before I went to academia, that to be successful, you need to have the soft skills as well. And my career journey did not make me aware of the need for those in a formal sense, or did not train me of the existence and about those in a formal sense until the last 18 months. And now that I joined Bayer, it's part of my onboarding. I'm being exposed to these things, and I would say these are important. And I sort of would have liked to have had been aware of those earlier in my career and start to train myself a little bit there. So, you know, when a few years ago, I was messing around on Twitter and I saw a quote, and it was from Henri Matisse, the French artist, and I'm not an art expert, so I just saw the quote. But you know, it's basically, don't try to be original, be simple, be technically good, and if there's something within you, it will come out. And at the time I saw that quote, I shared it with my students, and I think it summarized how we try to run our lab. So focus on being simple, focus on being technically really good. I would now add to that, make sure you've got the soft skills, and then relax and don't worry, because you will be successful and you will achieve your level without being worried. That's how I would see it. So over to you, Amy.
Thanks, John. So I guess my perspective is a little bit different. I spent most of my academic career hopping from domain to domain, trying to quickly get in, develop some expertise around an area, and then figure out how to have impact. And I think when I came to industry, I realized the importance of being comfortable in that space, and being okay with the fact that you're not always going to be the expert and that you can't always do it yourself has been a really great asset. And so it's provided me with a lot of agility and flexibility in the type of jobs that I do. And it makes it a lot easier to kind of ramp up in a new space, to kind of walk into a meeting and say, hey, you know, here's what I bring to the table. I don't have the expertise you did, but you know, how can we work together to deliver for the business? I think that's something that's really important. And another soft skill that I didn't intentionally develop, but just kind of happened, was being okay with taking risk and failing. And especially in the innovation space, this is really where you have to be very bold. I have to be comfortable walking into a room with Scott and John and saying, here's my idea, here's why I think it's a good one. And, you know, being able to provide the justification and the business value, and then having the, I guess, grit to kind of see those new projects through, because not everybody's going to always agree with your ideas. They're not always going to see the value that, you know, you see. And if you can kind of stick to your guns and be okay with failing and learning fast, I think you can, in the end, create more opportunities to really do new paradigm shifting type science that can impact the business and the industry. So with that, I'll pass it back to the coordinators.
Thanks. I just want to remind everyone that you can go ahead and start putting questions into the Q&A. So when we make that transition to audience questions, it's smoother. And to the panel, so what do you think the biggest challenges are associated with working in the industry?
I'm happy to go first this time. I think I've said what it is for me personally, and I think for everybody it will be different. But for me personally, having made the transition I've done and having gone on the journey I've gone on, it's about figuring out how to operate in a very large, complex organization where collaboration is king, rather than in the previous world I inhabited, where, you know, the individual was the king, if you like. That for me is the challenge. But for everybody's situation, I guess it will be different, and you'll need to identify where you're coming from and where you're going, and what your challenge would be uniquely.
Yeah, I would agree with what John said. I'd also build off of what Amy, I think her last point, getting comfortable not being the expert in the room. When you ran your own lab and you had your lab meetings, for the most part, you were the expert. Hopefully the students do more technically about a deep dive than you, but you were the expert. And when I joined Bayer, I was fortunate to lead a group with a lot of very smart people like Amy. And I can say that nearly 100% of the time, I'm not the smartest person or the expert in meetings. And that took, not that I'm not ever the smartest person, but it took a while to get used to the fact that I didn't have to know everything about the topic. I could learn from the people there. And that was a transition. One I'm still learning, but Amy?
Yeah, I think kind of really my response builds off what Scott and John were saying. I think in academia and in government, you could have a really good, brilliant idea and you could work through the project and deliver a PowerPoint to your group, and that's great. The challenge of industry is really you're expected to take that technical expertise and identify gaps in the business and figure out what is scalable rather than what is an interesting academic experiment. And I know I started in the company when I was really green, and I had all these ideas about how we can bring new genomic technologies and new data in, and wow, wouldn't it change the business? But then when you actually get into, well, we actually have to work with IT infrastructure, and we actually have to get data quality applied, and we actually have to make tens of thousands of decisions in an automated fashion off of that data. That really changes kind of the lens that you see things through. And so learning from, I guess, my academic, but then being able to apply that at scale is a huge challenge, and it requires connecting across teams and really just being agile and iterating a lot. Because I think basically every project that I start with a plan and a roadmap, fast forward 3 months, that roadmap is completely different. You kind of have to just be okay with, this is going to look very different by the time we get it into production. But again, that's, I think, what makes it very fun and makes it very challenging and exciting. Pass it back to you, Sarah and Chandler.
Yeah, so I think we're going to switch to audience questions. We have some good ones in the Q&A. So I'll just start with the order that they're submitted in. Be sure to vote if there's a specific question you want to see answered. So this one is from Lee Lay. And it's for everyone, how much freedom of developing the research you are interested in industry compared to academia? How much freedom do you have, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I think Amy has touched on it a little bit in her last response. So all of us exist in an R&D, research and development group within crop science at Bayer. Obviously, we're running pipelines that deliver products to farmers' fields that bring money in to drive the R&D organization. We have a fair amount of freedom. Obviously, when you're proposing ideas or things you want to test or experiments, or you have hypotheses that you want to build out experiments for, you have to show some business value, potential business value. We realize that we have a sort of a motto about fail fast and learn. Not that every experiment is going to be a success and give you some net business value, but they all drive towards the common purpose of delivering a better product more efficiently and to the farmers' fields. So within that common purpose, there's quite a bit of freedom. But obviously, we're driving towards a common purpose. There's also limitations on the academic side. You can have all sorts of great ideas, but if you can't get them funded, you can't do it. So it's not like it's a completely open field on the academic side either.
And I can just speak to some of the red tape that I experienced in the government. We were very restricted. You're slotted in as a research geneticist in a division that is studying a specific, goal for the government. You don't have a lot of flexibility to even kind of switch pathogens in some cases. And so I think for me, coming to Bayer and getting a feel for different crops, and you can partner with teams working on biologics who work with pathogens, or you can focus on some of the more breeding centric applications. And what I really like about Bayer is they promote kind of that cross-functional, cross-divisional work, because in the end, if you can create something that brings value to different parts of the company, that's good for everybody. And so that's something that in my own personal journey, I've really sought out opportunities to partner with folks from different areas or that have different expertise to figure out, what are the pipelines that we can create together that are going to allow us to bring new insights into our process. And so in that regard, it does give you a lot of flexibility to connect with different people, get new skill sets, have an understanding of different domains as you kind of work through that process.
I think Scott and Amy have both covered what I would say, I certainly didn't feel constrained in academia. I don't feel constrained in industry. I think, in fact, in academia, the freedom became itself a constraint. You were stuck, you were trapped on this cycle of opportunity that you felt you had to exhaust efficiently and fast. In industry, I think there's greater freedom because there are so many good people from such a diverse set of skills that are only a phone call away from having a big impactful project collaboratively worked on. Whereas in academia, if you try to put that together, it would take you 5 years and huge amounts of work, and you may have a 10% chance of getting it funded in the end. So swings and roundabouts, potentially industry has even more freedom.
Let me just add on. There's actually quite a bit of industry academic partnership and research. John was very active in that when he was at the University of Edinburgh. We had I don't know how many years we had collaboration with your lab there. We have collaborations with various other labs in the U.S. and other places. So there's quite a bit of openness, and we see the academic sector not as, we see it as a synergistic activity, not as working against each other. So there's a lot of opportunities even after you go to industry to work with academic partners.
So there's quite a few upvotes for this next question. Many international students shift their views about the U.S. from a country of possibilities to a place of doubt and disillusion. Do you have any final advice for international students as they get ready to get hired this year?
Yeah, I'm always an optimist, as Amy will attest. I always come with I look for the silver lining. The pictures, politics change. I'm going to speak very U.S. centric here. Obviously, the politics change every 4 to 8 years, and it'll change again when Congress has an election in 2 years or a year and a half. If you look at the long-term trajectory, even though we had a 4-year period where things seemed rather bleak for people that wanted to come in from outside our borders, we were still hiring people, international students at Bayer. They were still getting through green card, all the different things they need to get to work and for long-term residency. I don't see it as a problem. We're working through it, and we'll continue to work through it. We want the best scientists that we can get, and that's just the way we operate.
I can just comment.
Right.
I think what is real and what is portrayed in the media, there's a watch out there. When I worked at the National Institutes of Health, only 1 in 5 postdocs was a United States citizen. I know I just talked to we partner very closely with the University of Illinois to recruit interns, and he mentioned that 80% of the interns are not US citizens. And I just went through personally, was able to help one of my reports on my team get that green card application and get that first phase of approvals in place. And so I can't attest to how it feels, but I can just say that there are opportunities, and we are very, very excited to bring on international talent and kind of provide that diverse set of skills and talents into the business.
We're also an international company. We're actually a German company. John's located in Spain. So there's lots, it's not everything is just in the 48 states.
Awesome. Maybe I'll jump to our next question. So we have one from Porrick Flood, which was, what was the most unexpected or surprising aspect of transitioning to industry?
For me, I would say it was the size of the organization and the complexity of the organization. Sure, everybody tells you it's big and it's complex, but you don't really believe that until you see it on the inside.
Yeah, another piece of it, I completely agree, John. Maybe one of the pleasant side parts of it was, and this is up to the individual, right? So when a person goes in industry, you can still some people maintain a very public exterior. They're people, they go to meetings, interact with people, they still publish. Others go there, they do their science, they do their think industry, and they're not as active out externally anymore. And so one of the pleasant things was joining and walking into various conference rooms and running into former grad students and postdocs from when I was a graduate student and postdoc that I hadn't seen in 15, 20 years, just because they don't go to we didn't go to the same set of meetings and things like that. And so it was sort of a reunion of sorts.
I think for me, one of the things that I found really surprising, and this is probably because it does feel that industry is so big and so complex and there's so many different moving parts. But with that, I was really surprised at how incredibly supportive and willing different people or teams are to kind of bring you into their domain, to help you get your feet wet in a different area, to just have conversations about what they do, what are the opportunities, mentoring. And I think that kind of comes from that complexity. I mean, no one can be an expert in everything. We rely on each other so heavily to get things done that, supporting different teams and supporting folks that are new in industry is just a really huge part of everybody being successful. So I think that was really a pleasant surprise for me.
Sarah, do you want to close out or do we have time for one more question?
Oh, I think we have plenty of time for another question. Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure, sorry. Okay, so actually the next question is two, one for Scott and one for John. So Scott first, how is academic leadership different than the industry leadership?
Wow, very different. So academic leadership, I directed 2 centers and institute at Georgia. It's what analogy to use? It's sort of like herding cats, maybe. That'd be the best positive thing you can put on it. Every PI, every faculty member is their own empire, essentially, right? And so if you're trying to, there's not a common purpose for the most part, except for that we all work under the auspices of the University of Georgia. We had the Institute for Plant Breeding, and there was a common purpose there. But even then, it's every lab is, they have to fund their own students, they have to fund their postdocs, they have to fund their research program, and so it's a lot like herding cats. In industry, there's a common goal, there's a common focus. We want the company to do well. We want to put the best products we can put into the farmers' fields. Within our group, we want to provide the data insights to make that happen. So yeah, this vision of what we want to do, we want to put the best products in the farmers' fields. Within our group, we want to make the best provide the best data for the breeding decisions that we provide to make that happen. And we all work together towards a common purpose in that regard. And it's not even really leadership, it's just teamwork.
Great, thanks. I am totally okay with being compared to a cat.
No, it's comparing your advisor to a cat, but don't tell her.
I won't tell her. The next question is for John. Let's see. Alina says, thank you so much for your wonderful genomic selection papers and the simulation models. You took starkly different jobs in your career. Were you hesitant to take different career decisions? And if you were, what helped you make those decisions? So a little bit more on your transition.
Sure. So herding cats is easy. You just need to move the food. And I think that summarizes what's the problem with academia. So yes, it may seem to others that I took stark and drastic career choices. It never felt like that for me, I have to say. It always felt like a very natural next step, and an exciting new opportunity to add some new knowledge or new skills. And I guess I distinctly remember when I was a PhD student and I would go home every evening from my work, and I would ask myself on my way home, have I learned something today? And I remember saying, you know, yes, I have. And it was like that right up until the last 6 months of my PhD, when I sort of felt, well, I've stopped learning in this place because, you know, I've learned the tricks from this shop. And then I went to Australia to do my postdoc, and I did a long postdoc in Australia. I was 4 years, and I could have exited earlier and gone off and got a faculty position or something at an earlier stage. But whenever an opportunity would present itself, I would ask myself, well, did I learn something today? And the answer was always yes. Today I have learned something, and I felt I hadn't learned all I could learn from that opportunity. But at some point, you know, an opportunity did present itself to go to Mexico, and it so happened that at that time I sort of came to the conclusion I've learned all I can learn in this place. So each time I think I wasn't looking for any career move. They all tended to just happen to come to me. But I took them because on the balance of what I'm doing today versus what I'm going to do next week, I finished and learned as much as I can here, or if you apply the 80-20 principle to that, I'm at the 80%. If I go to a new place, I'm going to learn so much more quickly, and why not do it? And you know, also underpinning that, I would say, is when I was young, you know, when I was a teenager, when I was a child, I was a worrier. I used to be worried about things all the time. And at some point in my early 20s, I just stopped worrying about things. And, you know, I realized that I'm still alive. You know, I was worried about something yesterday. It didn't happen. I'm still alive. I look outside, the rabbits are playing, the grass is green. You know, everything is great. What do I need to worry about? And something, you know, I joined Bayer. It was a big change. So people thought, you're crazy, John. You know, what if it goes wrong? I said, well, if it goes wrong, something else will appear. And you know, I think everybody ends up finding their way, and that's the way I look at it. So back to the chair.
Awesome. Yeah. So are you all able to stay on for like an extra minute and we can take one final question, or would you like me to skip to closing? Good. Awesome. Thank you so much. So our last question is from Rachel, and she asks, what advice do you have for graduate students completing internships in industry, and how can they make the most out of this experience?
I can start. I was actually just chatting with our internship office yesterday, and I think two things kind of emerged from that conversation on what can make a successful internship. One is making sure that you know, the project that you want to work on is clearly defined, and that you feel comfortable with the mentor and the sponsor that you have, and the work that's been laid out seems reasonable. Two is to go into it with an open mindset about what success looks like, even if at the end of the day, the experiment that you you know, work on or were expected to deliver is a complete failure. That's a really great opportunity to have learnings and to create kind of a story around how you can use those learnings to improve your skill set or improve your collaborations. I think that's you know, one thing from an internship experience, when you've got just a very limited period of time, make the best out of it.
100% everything Amy said. The other thing I would add is that I would treat it as an interview, a 3 month, 6, however long it is. You're looking at them as a potential employer, and they're looking at you as a potential employee. So keeping that mindset is would be good.
I think points are well made. I would just add, look at the individual that you're going to join, work with, for, and say to yourself, is this individual am I going to be able to learn something by working with this individual? When I was finishing up my PhD, I spent quite a bit of time looking on the internet for postdoc advisors, and I ended up going to a postdoc advisor who may not be the fanciest scientist in my field, but I identified him as the best trainer of young people. And that was a decision that was really valuable for me personally. You know, when you look to your intern opportunities, say, well, where am I going to get the best training? If if you have the opportunity to do more than one, why not, apply the 80-20 principle? Say, well, I could do 3 months in one place, I could do 3 months in another place, I could do 3 months in another place. And by doing that, I'll get more exposure and more experiences.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks again to our panelists for joining us today, and thanks everyone who was able to tune in. I just want to say, be sure to keep an eye out for the next webinar announcement. It's scheduled for April 12th, and we'll be featuring scientists from the University of Georgia. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to the early career group with any feedback or ideas on future topics you'd like to see covered. Yeah, thanks again, everyone. This was really great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah and Chandler.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.